A revolution in natural medicine is underway, and the Blue Earth Medicine podcast, featuring Dr. Jill Johnson and host Brad Johnson, will lead you on a fun and interesting journey into naturopathic medicine. Thanks for joining us. We're glad you're here. All right, welcome to Blue Earth Medicine podcast. We're coming to you from the Pacific Northwest in our Seattle area studio. We're your hosts. I'm Brad Johnson, and with me is naturopathic Dr. Jill Johnson. And together we'll explore the world of natural medicine, take a dive into health topics, and give you tips and tricks to stay healthy and have fun doing it. Since this is our very first podcast, our inaugural podcast, I'd like to provide a little bit of background on us, and of course, over time, you'll learn more about us. But over the past decade, Brad, I spent a lot of time in the wine world. I directed and produced a documentary film called Wine Diamonds, Uncorking America's Heartland, and was the host of a wine podcast called The Theory of Wine. My co-host and wife, Dr. Jill Johnson, spent much of her professional career as a college professor of anatomy and physiology. However, in 2016, she followed her desire to be a naturopathic doctor. And 4 years later, in 2020, she earned her doctorate of naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University and is now in private practice in Bothell, Washington. In today's podcast, we'll begin by learning more about Dr. Jill's background, and then we'll shift to the topic of today, which is vitamin D. You probably have some ideas about vitamin D, and I thought I did too. And then I talked to Dr. Jill, and she showed me some new things, which was pretty interesting. So I think the first thing that it's really important to do when you start a podcast like this is really kind of establishing identity of like who we are and where we come from. That was just a little hint of that. But right now, I'm curious, and I'd like you to share with the world your path to becoming a naturopathic doctor. Pass it off to you, Dr. Jill.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. My path has been a long one. I started thinking about being a doctor way back when, in the late 1980s. So this has been a while coming. And I kind of skirted around the issue a lot. Brad and I together have two children who are now adults. But both of them I had with midwives, and the second one had a home birth with a direct entry midwife, and started working with her. That got me even more intrigued in natural health, herbs. We helped women with a lot of different herbs during pregnancy and following pregnancy, so that kind of gave me a window on some of the herbal medicines out there. From there, I kind of played around in different areas a little bit and ended up as a college professor for more than 10 years. And that was great. As Brad said, I taught anatomy and physiology to primarily pre-nursing students, but basically that entry-level anatomy and physiology, talking about all the different systems and what they do, how they work, all that wonderful, fun stuff. Working
probably a pretty good entry into being a physician, understanding the body and how it functions really well. So tell us about it. Yeah. Tell us about the next step in your life.
Well, all along I had been thinking about naturopathic school, finding out about the ND world, that there was this thing called naturopathic medicine back in the late 90s. Because that's exactly what I was looking for. I wasn't real excited about going into the allopathic, or what is our conventional system right now. But I didn't know any other way. So found out about naturopathic school and looked into it, and took 15 years before I applied, got in, and actually attended to Bastyr University here in the Seattle area in 2016. Wow. So then school took 4 years, which was a grueling 4 years. And here I am in my own practice and having a ball, seeing patients and helping people out.
Interject for a second. This is what's really cool. You've had a professional career in academia, teaching and being part of, really learning communities.
Yep.
And, you went to India while you were a professor at a college in Iowa, and it was kind of a life-changing moment. And I mean, there's so many things that kind of came into fed into this, but here you are, pushing on 50 when you are applying to medical school. That doesn't happen very much. And so I think, not only is it cool that you're doing it, but it's cool that you are really a model for folks that kind of like reinvent themselves at different stages in life. So I think that's really cool.
Well, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I think I was 51 when I started, almost on the verge of 52 when I started medical school. So if you're thinking about it, if you're excited about doing something in the medical field, you can do it.
Yeah.
You can make it happen. It takes some resolve, but you can make it happen.
For sure. As a partner to somebody that went to medical school, I can attest from this position, it's a lot of work. But you did mention, though, you were talking about, you looked at conventional medicine. We think of it as allopathy or MD, medical doctor. There's definitely a good business model to follow, but it was not your path to follow that kind of like doctoring. So what is it about ND versus MD that really attracted you to naturopathic medicine?
Well, one of the main things that I look at is the philosophy. So what we're all taught, what we grow up with, what I grew up with is if you get sick, there's always a cause when you get sick, right? In the conventional system, what makes you sick is some kind of external bug. Something is causing a problem and you got to get rid of that problem and then you'll be healthy. And what naturopathic medicine says is that that's not really the case. What we say is that yes, we can get sick from bugs having overgrowth and kind of getting out of hand. But what we look at is that the body is trying to heal itself. And the reason we get sick is because it's trying to heal itself and can't. Okay. And so we end up feeling pain, getting sick, getting a fever, having inflammation because our body's trying to heal. And that may very well and is likely to be taught in conventional schools, but it also is taught that medication, pharmaceuticals is the answer. Now, I'm not saying that pharmaceuticals are not beneficial in many, many ways. But what I look at first is what can I do? How can I help the body do what it needs to do and heal itself instead of giving something to dampen those symptoms that we feel when the body's really working hard to try and do its thing and heal. And we're just cutting it off at the knees, basically.
So, for example, if I have a fever, say I'm running 101 degree fever, I'm not feeling well. And so conventional practices would suggest that you take something to reduce your fever. So is that the way that naturopathic doctors would kind of look at that?
No, in fact, we discourage any medication to reduce fever. Fever is part of our innate immune system. It is part of our immune system for us to be able to mount a fever. And 101 degrees is really, fever doesn't begin until we're at least 100.4 and above. So 101 isn't really a high fever. It's a good fever. But what the body is trying to do, inflammation and a fever is trying to manage whatever it is that's making us sick. If it's a virus, that fever limits access to certain nutrients that a virus or a bacteria might need to reproduce. And so by having a higher fever, you can limit the reproduction or proliferation of those certain microbes that may be out of control and leading to symptoms that we feel.
See, this to me is like the coolest thing, and really something we probably ought to dedicate a show to, because so many people, they get a little bit of a spike in a rise in temperature in their body, and they run to the medication cabinet to kind of dampen that down. And so they may not realize that they're working against their body trying to heal itself, because our bodies allow us to heal ourselves. We're created to heal ourselves, right?
We are.
And so we're just getting in the way of it. So This is fascinating stuff. And I mean, I want to keep coming back to these sorts of things as we continue with the podcast. But, one of the reasons we came here today was really to launch the podcast, talk a little bit about your background and how you got here, but also to kind of explore different topics that we may know some things about and may know a lot about or may not know as much as we think we do. So, here it is, mid to late part of November. We're out in the Seattle area. So the rains are finally coming and the skies are turning gray. And boy, it's a tough slog in the northern hemisphere during the winter months, especially in the low northern latitudes. If you're in Alaska, if you're in Seattle, you're in Chicago, it becomes more of a challenge. So as winter approaches, daylight begins to dwindle, and our health can be impacted, both emotionally and physiologically. So that's my segue into, let's talk about vitamin D. And so my question to you is, you buy a jug of milk and you say it contains or fortified with vitamin D, and you see that a lot. So can you tell all of us what is vitamin D?
Yeah. So many of us take multivitamin mineral daily, and what vitamins and minerals generally are, you can think of them, they're called cofactors or coenzymes. So in order for chemical reactions to happen in our body, which is how we stay alive and how our body does anything, we have these enzymes that allow those chemical reactions to happen faster. So vitamins and minerals can, like vitamin C or B6 or B3, those vitamins act as kind of an additional piece to that enzyme to make it work. Okay. If we don't have those vitamins, that enzyme doesn't really work very well or very efficiently. So that enzyme won't be able to do what it's supposed to do. Okay. And so that's important about vitamins and minerals. So vitamin D is a little bit different. Vitamin D isn't really a vitamin. It acts more like a hormone in that it binds to receptors on cells, either on a cell membrane or within the cell, and causes that cell to do something. Okay. So it basically is a signal. It's a signal to tell the cell, make this, stop making that, dump this out of the cell, or, bring this thing in. So vitamin D it does act more like a hormone. That's and I also want to mention too that vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, or substance, I guess. There are 4 vitamins, and you've heard of all of them, I'm sure. Vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. All of those, and only those, are what are called fat-soluble vitamins. And those, in order for us to get them into the blood, into the system of our body, they can just be absorbed through cell membranes, through the cells. So we don't need anything special to help absorb them, except that if we eat them with a little bit of fat or include some fat if we're taking supplements with those vitamins, it'll help absorb them. But they can absorb into our body regardless of if we're eating something or not. Okay. So another thing about fat-soluble vitamins is they can be stored mostly in fat and in our fat cells. So if we're taking large amounts of them, we can store up a bunch, but then if we break down those fat cells, we can release a bunch. If we exercise and we decrease our fat cell size, for example, we burn fat, we can release all of those stored vitamins or stored chemicals into the blood, and that can raise the amount of vitamin D, for example, in our blood and cause it to be too high. And that can be a problem.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay, I'm probably going to want to circle back to that in a while, but that's fascinating to know. So it's there, vitamin D, among others are fat soluble vitamins slash hormones, or whatever we want to call them, substances or like that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. So I'm not sure, what is the difference between a vitamin and a hormone then? I mean, that seems kind of makes me want to scratch my head.
So vitamins are going to attach themselves to an enzyme and basically activate it.
Okay.
And those enzymes are specific molecules within the body that will actually produce different molecules. For example, you eat a piece of meat. That's a protein. Well, we can't absorb the proteins from our digestive tract into the blood. So we have to break down that protein that we just ate. We break it down into amino acids. Those amino acids are small enough we can now absorb those, get them from the digestive tract, from our intestines, into the blood. And so now what do we do with these amino acids? We need to build them. We use an enzyme, or many different types of enzymes, to take those amino acids to build our own proteins, to build our own molecules. And so what a vitamin does is it attaches itself to those enzymes to make it do its thing, to make it, to help it make things.
Okay.
Right? To make a protein or whatever other molecules we need. So a hormone, it gets circulated in the blood and it binds to receptors that are on cells.
Okay.
So if we think about, a cell being in one plane here and then the blood is right here. Now here's a little receptor sticking out.
Right.
That hormone can bind right there. And that causes the cell inside to change and do things.
Okay.
Basically, that's one type of hormone. Another type of hormone can actually just go right into a cell and cause changes.
Okay.
So enzymes make and break things down. Hormones cause the cells to change.
Can you tell us what is, how does vitamin D work and why do we care?
Well, I kind of alluded to it just now. It can attach to it attaches to receptors, whether it's on the surface of a cell or within the cell. It can do either thing. Depends on the organ it's
Gotcha.
at. And so so it causes this cell, whatever organ, whatever that cell is part of, say a bone cell, for example, that vitamin D is going to cause changes with that cell to allow it to, bone is a bad example, intestinal cell. So vitamin D binds to a receptor on the intestinal cell and then changes happen in that cell to tell calcium to get absorbed and go through and into the blood. So
we're going to get more into that.
Calcium.
Yeah, we're going to get more into that kind of that chain here down the list of questions I have. But so when we think of vitamin C, I tend to think of supplements, but in terms of like, how do we get vitamin D into our body? I mean, do we make it? Is it something we eat? Is it something that happens outside of us? I'm just not 100% sure.
Yeah, so vitamin D can get into our body a number of ways. One of the prime ways that we think of is by sunlight. And so we're in the sun, we expose our skin, and then we're making vitamin D. And there's a more complex process to that, which I won't go into right now. But the other thing is we can eat it. Vitamin D is found in some foods, primarily fatty fishes like salmon, sardines, tuna, that type of fish. So we can get it that way. The other way that we can get it is through supplementation. So, you find vitamin D anywhere they sell supplements.
Right.
And it's easy to find in supplement form.
So let me kind of dig back to the question. You said that the concept, the idea of sunshine allowing our body to create vitamin D. So it's gray, it's not sunny out, and it's cold.
Yeah.
If you're in the mountains, it's going to be colder. If you're in the Midwest, it's freezing cold. You probably don't get a lot of skin exposed to the sunshine. How would you know?
Right.
I mean, what do we do about? I mean, are we getting the kind of sunshine to help convert? I mean, to create vitamin D in our body just through sunshine during the winter times?
Yeah, so depends on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Closer to the equator you are, the more time you have during the day, the longer the period of time when you can, if you have exposed skin, where you can start the process of making vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
The further north you are, so in the Seattle area, right now, for example, in December, January, we only have maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, where if we were outside and exposed our skin, we would be able to make vitamin D. And that's really anybody in the northern latitudes, Minnesota, Montana, even as far south as like Colorado. It's harder to make vitamin D in the winter. And the main reason is because of the angle the sun and the sun's rays are coming. Even if it's sunny, the angle of the rays may come at a certain position that the types of rays we need, which are UVB rays, don't actually reach the surface of the earth.
Oh.
And so some do, but not as many as in the middle of summer.
Right.
And plus our skin's not exposed either.
Yeah, we usually have just a little bit of face skin, or maybe your hands if it's not too cold.
Yeah, so it becomes harder and harder for us to get enough vitamin D as we go into the grayer, cloudier months and colder months when we're covered up.
Perfect. This is awesome. So I'm at the health food store, I'm at my co-op, I'm at the grocery store, and I'm looking for supplements. I see it liquid form, I see it in capsule form, I see it part of multivitamins. I often see vitamin D along with calcium, along with vitamin K. I mean, are those like the trifecta of, I don't know, vitamin friends?
Yeah, well, partially it depends on what you're looking for. So vitamin D, its main claim to fame is for bone density, maintaining bone density. So one of the things vitamin D does is it helps us absorb calcium. So in the intestines, for example, say I take that supplement, calcium, vitamin D, and vitamin K. So now vitamin D is going to trigger those intestinal cells to absorb the calcium, get calcium into the blood from the GI tract. And that's great. Now our calcium's higher in our blood. Great. Now it can go to the bones. It can go wherever it's needed. But there could be an issue with trying to get calcium now into the bones. So D is instrumental in getting calcium absorbed into the blood. But now that calcium, in order to get into the bones, which is where we want it, or one of the places we want it, now we need something else. We need vitamin K to help that calcium get absorbed into the bone. And so we need both vitamin D to get the calcium in, and then the K to get the calcium deposited in the bone, which will make it harder, stronger, make us more resilient and less likely for bone fractures and all kinds of things. So vitamin K is important, along with vitamin D.
This is super fascinating. Before we came on air here, we talked about osteoporosis, and then and that's kind of the calcification of bone. Is that right? And then maybe I'm wrong. So help me understand where the bone gets dense and kind of crispy, and then where it gets a little bit malleable. Forgive me for my
so there, if you don't have enough vitamin D or enough calcium, either one of these things could cause a disease in children called rickets. And rickets is really the inability to form bone. before our bones get hard, so when we're infants, we have some bone formation, but they're not completely formed. They're not completely calcified. And so if we don't have enough vitamin D or enough calcium, we won't be able to deposit the calcium into the bone and get hard bones. So bones stay soft. And then that makes them, once a child starts to stand and move around, those bones aren't really fully bones, and they're soft, and so they bend, and there's different stressors put on them, and there can be some malformation there. Okay. So it's very important for especially children to get enough vitamin D. In adults, there's a similar thing happens, and it's called osteomalacia, and that's where the calcium, either we don't have enough calcium or enough vitamin D, and we cannot then put calcium into the bone. And what happens throughout our lives is we continually, it's called reabsorption of bone. So we break down bone, we make bone, we break down bone, make bone. It's constantly going on, right? And so if we're breaking down bone, but we don't have calcium or vitamin D to bring the calcium into the body, we don't have that calcium available, our bones are going to remain softer. Gotcha. So there's collagen and other connective tissues besides calcium that makes bone. And so they stay soft. And so we get this disease called osteomalacia as an adult. So that can be really problematic for many people. Now that's different from osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a larger loss of bone. So it's not that your bones don't have the calcium to deposit. It's just not. And so you end up with porous or holy bones, and they become very, very brittle, and they're higher. That's a higher risk for break or fracturing of those bones. So there's a difference. Yeah. There.
So this really leads us to the next question, and we're gonna pay attention to our time here. But so $100 question is, if I'm looking for supplements, how much should I shoot for?
Well, supplementation is a little bit more tricky because everybody's level is going to be different. And so you really need to be tested for your vitamin D level to see if you're deficient or insufficient, or if you have too much. All of those can be problems. So it's really important that you talk to your doctor about potential vitamin D issues, and get that tested and see where you are, because then only then will you and your doctor be able to determine, well, what's a good dosage for me. The RDA, I will say the RDA recommends for adults 600 IUs.
That's recommended daily allowance, right?
Recommended daily allowance, right? If you're over 70, it's 800 IUs per day. But that may change depending on where your vitamin D level is within your body. Everybody's going to be different. Where you live is going to make it different. What you do for a living may make it different. So it really depends.
So the bottom line is really go get, maybe during your annual physical or semi-annual physical, get some blood drawn and see where your vitamin D levels are, and especially coming into winter. And
exactly, yeah. And winter would be more, especially in the northern latitudes, would be more, you'd be more likely to have lower levels during the winter.
Right.
So talk to your doctor about it, get it checked out. Your doctor will know how to get it tested for you. It's a simple blood draw, like most things in the annual visit.
So that's good to know. You mentioned about, when if you're working out and you're burning a bunch of fat and you're taking supplements, that you may be kind of doubling down on the vitamin D your body is dealing with. Can you overdose is there an overdose of vitamin D? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, you can overdose on vitamin D, and that could, because vitamin D impacts calcium, there's a lot of implications with getting too much calcium in the body, in the blood especially. So that calcium can start to attach to blood vessel walls. It can lead to hypertension. Calcium is also required in muscle and nerves. So that can cause changes to nervous system signaling. It can cause changes to how your muscles work. It can lead to weakness, to tremors, to all different kinds of things. There's a lot of different things that can happen because of too much vitamin D, which leads to too much calcium. Yeah, and too little is also a problem. So
right. Okay, well, it's probably good to understand where your body is, right? I mean, I always, people say see your doctor. I always say see your naturopathic physician, because we are. I mean, NDs are licensed in majority of the U.S. states and in Canada as well. It's always good to talk to somebody that specializes in natural health and that has really a philosophical difference than kind of traditional conventional medicine. When I think about vitamin D, I think of supplements, but I know also it exists in real life. It exists in foods. Can you name a few foods? You've already named a few, but just kind of reiterate those again.
Yeah, so fatty fish like salmon, sardines are a big one. Tuna. Also, a lot of things are fortified. So milk is fortified, some orange juices. Cereal, like breakfast cereal, is often fortified. So pay attention to all your sources of vitamin D, and that could be in any different. They could be fortified in any number of different foods. So yeah, primarily it's those fatty fish in foods.
As a mushroom guy, I do believe that there are some mushrooms that are beneficial, and probably a lot of mushrooms are, but I know we know one in particular.
Shiitake mushrooms does contain vitamin D, and I'm not certain of the actual, the exact amount that they carry, but you'd probably check that out. And we can get that on the post too when we put this out. Yeah, shiitake mushrooms. If you like mushrooms, go with shiitake.
Yeah, they're delicious. I love mushrooms. Hey, we're getting down to the end of the wire here. I want to make sure that if there's other things that we haven't discussed, that we have a moment now to bring those up. Any other important things or any words of inspiration to folks that are maybe new to naturopathic medicine? I've heard it said both ways. Words of wisdom, words of inspiration.
Yeah, there in Washington State, there are a large number of naturopathic doctors. Do some research, look for the ones that resonate with you, look at their websites, call them, talk to them. Many of them have 15-minute, 30-minute free kind of initial consultation just to see if you're a good fit. And that's for you to decide as a patient as well as them. So it's up to you to advocate for your own health and keep searching if you don't find what you want.
That's perfect advice. So on that, I would like to finish off our show today by saying a few words here closing. Dr. Jill is a licensed naturopathic doctor in private practice in Bothell, Washington, a Seattle suburb, and is accepting new patients. If you're outside of the state of Washington, Dr. Jill is accepting health coaching clients. To book an appointment, visit her website at blueearthmedicine.com. And while there, sign up for her monthly newsletter for natural health and podcast updates. From the Blue Earth Medicine podcast, we're sending you healing energy, love, and light. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, share, and join us for our next episode. Peace, friends.
And health. Bye.